In this week's Fed Speak, we talked to Scott Garlis, the editor of the Stansberry Newswire, about what we're hearing from the Federal Reserve governors. We had 5 governors speak this week, Scott, and you're coming away with a distinct sense that things are looking up.
Yeah. So we had 5 voting people, like you said, spoke earlier this week. And what we saw was they're still cautious on the near-term outlook in terms of coronavirus infections and the impact on the economy. But they started making positive comments about the medium-term outlook. And that's the first time we've heard that in a while.
So I want to begin first with Vice Chair Richard Clarida. He signaled that he's willing to go beyond the existing strategies to keep the economy afloat on a Monday appearance. Also said the appearance of these highly effective vaccines could unleash as much as $1 trillion that is still on the sidelines, because he said there's been a lot of savings because of the fiscal stimulus, the congressional stimulus. Let's listen to his quote now.
There's an enormous quantity of pent-up saving. Fiscal policy was so successful that this is the only downturn in my professional career in which disposable income actually went up in a deep recession. And a lot of that has been saved. A lot of that has been forcibly saved because people haven't been able to go out and necessarily spend all of that. So when you combine the good news on the vaccine with north of $1 trillion of accumulated saving, then there's a very, very attractive right tail to this distribution.
Is an available vaccine enough to get people to actually spend that money, or does everyone have to be able to get the vaccine in order for them to feel comfortable to spend that $1 trillion or so that are currently sitting on the sidelines?
I think what's going to happen is people are going to have a better sense of a vaccine. Right now, they're going to have to hang on to it in terms of, if infections are going to spike because we're hitting colder weather, people are going to come into more contact with one another. So businesses clamp down a bit. There is going to be a bit of a fear, but having a cushion is going to help a lot. Now, I think once we move closer to vaccinations becoming more common among everybody, which is probably really starting in the middle of next year, I think that's when you'll see more money being spent.
Let's just, on the flip side, ask this question. What could $1 trillion in consumer spending, if it all comes in at once, do for the economic recovery?
That would be a gigantic boom. In terms of 2018 dollars, I believe total GDP was about 20 trillion. Yeah, if you see $1 trillion suddenly flood into the market, that would be massive amounts of demand for consumer goods. And that money would filter out all over the place. I think what we really want to see, though, is we want to see service industries come back, like restaurants, because that has been the one part of the economy that's really lagged.
Yeah, and I believe a couple of the Fed governors this week talked about the need for very highly targeted stimulus to go specifically to those industries, because these are often people that are living paycheck to paycheck, that live off tips. And so they're very much, and the restaurants that employ them, obviously, very much affected by all of these lockdowns. I mean, where I live, and I know where you live, have just instituted new rules, and that's likely to continue. We also heard from Fed Chair Powell this week. He did an interview with the Bay Area Council of Business Hall of Fame, and he was asked when the Fed will try to reduce its debt. Keep in mind that in the past 13 years, that debt has gone from $900 billion to $7 trillion today. Here's what he said.
I would say it's really premature to even think about normalizing to think about the size of the balance sheet and things like that. We're focused for now on achieving the goals that Congress has given: maximum employment and price stability. And we'll start to think about when it's time to slow down our purchases, which would slow the growth of the balance sheet, and take further steps going forward. We'll start to think about that when there's been a whole lot more progress toward those goals.
So, Scott, why is it premature? And do you agree that it's premature to discuss how we unwind all of the debt that the Fed is taking on right now?
Definitely. What we don't want to do, that Powell's trying to tell everybody, is we don't want to pull the rug out from under the economy too soon. There is still uncertainty in the near term about what's going to happen with the infections, what kind of lockdowns we may or may not see, and what the impact on the economy is going to be. Again, we're going into these winter months where everybody has to move indoors, be closer together. We just don't know how that's going to play out. So let's be safe instead of sorry. Another thing you must think about here is that the Fed doesn't expect inflation or interest rates really to go up, inflation to have that much of an impact and force rates higher. until 2024. So again, you want to have these facilities that are supportive of the economy and keep rates higher until that time. So pulling them out now versus when you think inflation really isn't going to pick up until 3 years from now just doesn't make sense. Another really interesting part of that I don't feel like the media really covered was the comments that Powell made about the medium term. For the first time in a long time, Jay Powell said he's optimistic about the medium term potential for the economy. And that means sort of that 6-month to 12-month horizon, really beginning in the middle of next year when that vaccine should start to take hold. And I think that's a big deal, and that's been overlooked.
What about the prospect for small businesses, as we mentioned earlier, to really suffer further if there's no fiscal stimulus on the horizon? And it does not appear that the current Congress or potentially even the next Congress is going to be well positioned by the new administration to put a sizable package together. If that comes to pass, what are we looking at in terms of bankruptcies? Could we see, as some of our colleagues at Stansberry Research say, that we're going to see a wave of bankruptcies coming in the new year?
Sure. I think businesses that are going to be the most affected are most likely businesses that are based in some of these big city centers. New York, the restaurant hotel industry in New York, they need help. There's no way that they're going to make it through the winter very easily. Again, New York is clamping down already. They're closing their schools. They're sending them all to virtual learning. That's not going to be good for things like tourism. And New York is a very densely packed city. I believe it's the densely packed in the country by a factor. So yeah, the winter is going to be interesting. And I think it was Bullard, James Bullard, the St. Louis Fed president, who made these comments earlier in the week. He said, stimulus needs to be very targeted for industries like this that are going to suffer the most. But it was Rosengren, Eric Rosengren up in Boston. He also made comments earlier in the week talking about consumer demand is actually greater than what it was before the pandemic started. It's just the service industries that are lagging right now.
All right, and last question. We know that there is going to be another Fed board meeting in December. It'll be the last meeting of the year. What do you believe the critical decision is that needs to be made during that meeting to keep the recovery going or to help restart the recovery that was going, especially if we don't get stimulus?
So the critical decision there is going to be that the Fed is going to up asset purchases. And the reason they're going to do that is to make sure rates stay low and that banks basically have plenty of liquidity. So they're going to keep dollars in the system. They're going to keep businesses funded. Maybe we see something like they reduce the level in terms of what kinds of loans businesses can take out from the Main Street Lending Program. They recently took it down to 100,000. Maybe they take it down to say 50,000, and just to have a broader reach. But again, I think asset purchases are going to be the key. I wouldn't be surprised if you see it go from something like, say, $120 billion a month toward the $140 billion a month range.
All right. Scott Garlis there from the Stansberry Newswire. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And if you'd like to catch up with any more Stansberry Research content, please take a look at all of these social media platforms where you can find us. That's all for now. Thanks for watching. I'm Jessica Stone.